Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. It is July 27th. Today's webinar is going to be Tribal Housing Customer Service, Honoring the Experience, presented by Marie Bonville. My name is Alyssa Atkins, and I will be your webinar facilitator today. I am the Training and Development Coordinator for the Native Learning Center. Just a quick disclaimer before we get started. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. If you look at the top of your screen, you will see an icon of either a person with their hand raised or just a hand. With that icon, you can either raise hand, agree, disagree, or step away. Now your screen should look similar to the graphic here. To the bottom left, you will see a box that says Files. Here you will find any additional handout. There is a case study today, so please go ahead and download that case study. Please feel free to download a copy for yourself. Simply click the item you would like to download, then click the arrow pointing downwards to download and save onto your devices. Once the item is downloaded, it should appear on your device's download section. Oops. The second box that states web links is where you will find our survey. This box is here for you to fill out and, oops, sorry, got ahead of myself. If you look over at the web links, you will see today's survey as well as the Adobe Connect app download link and any additional links provided in the presentation. Lastly, to the right of the screen, we have a chat box available. This is how you will communicate to the instructor and NLC staff. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to interact by using the chat box. Simply type your message and hit enter or click that up arrow icon button to submit. Tech support issues should also be submitted here. It is now with a pleasure that I introduce Marie Bonville.
Thank you, Alyssa, for that introduction. Thank you to the folks in the room here. We're going to go ahead and get started. We got a lot of content to go over today, but I do appreciate the opportunity to be back with my family at the Native Learning Center. Bear with me. I'm going to share my screen. If it'll let me. One moment. There we go. That's better. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see my screen. As Alyssa said, today's topic is tribal housing customer service. Before I forget, go ahead and put your name and where you're from in the chat area. I find it, it's such a great opportunity for us to not necessarily be in a silo, but work with our colleagues. So when you see somebody with the same background or title as yourself, that's where some great conversations can take place and connections can be made. I always feel that way. So, and I love when we can network in the virtual environment like this. So feel free to put your name, the organization you work with, and your title in the chat. I try to keep this webinar interactive. Nobody wants to talk for 90 minutes straight. So for sure, we're going to have an opportunity to get to know each other here in a minute. A little bit about myself. I started my career with the Seminole Tribe of Florida. I won't give you a year, give myself away there, but I've held several positions in their education department. And then lastly, with the Native Learning Center as the Director of Training and Technical Assistance. So that's where I got very familiar with all things housing related as it relates to NAHASDA and the real work that we do to provide safe and sanitary homes in our communities. I am the owner of Sunlight Armor Homes, which is a general contracting business. We provide home ownership, repair, and some commercial work as well. And then I own my own realty group here in the state of Georgia, where I'm licensed. I still facilitate homeownership trainings throughout the country, specifically with the South Dakota Native Homeownership Coalition. I do a lot of practitioner work, best practices in assisting all the tribes within that organization on promoting homeownership education, and then also to Cheyenne River Housing Authority, their housing education component as well. I have a bachelor's in political science, and I love public admin. I think that's where my heart lives, if I'm honest. And I have a certificate in community development. I am a wife and a mother of two. And as I said, I reside in Ackworth, Georgia. So that's a little bit about me. But why customer service? Why does it matter? You don't hear it discussed much in the nonprofit world, the human services world. But how we relate with our clients is important. I know the day-to-day operations and how frustrating that may be for most of you. And so it does mean that we need to have and take time to evaluate and plan for how we will approach our clients, our managers, our staff, and our vendors. We have a relationship to all of those individuals. So to provide a better client services option, we have to start with a plan. And so this webinar will talk about in-person, email, phone, and text. We are now living in the world where the majority of our interactions aren't necessarily face-to-face. And what does that mean for our clients? When we talk about customer service, I use customer service in the title because everyone knows what that means. But, these aren't customers, these are clients. And so what about the relationships outside of just direct services, but showing people what we do and why we do it. If a customer has a bad experience, typically that person tells other people, and that relates into what? People stop using those services. That's not the case here. Our clients need our services, oftentimes coming to us in a traumatic way, right? In a need for housing, in a need for stability. And so because of that motive being different, we would have to look at this from a couple different perspectives. So hopefully this webinar does just that. Of course, we have to address difficult situations in new and positive ways. As I said before, we're living in an environment where so much of what our clients experience in every other aspect of their life is online. Then how can we tap into some of that? I think I know it can also be costly, which is why sometimes people don't want to go down that road of intake forms being online, et cetera. But there is a benefit to that as we get clients that are much more tech savvy. And of course, explaining the benefits of having a customer or client relations plan, something that you can reference within your organization. So if you had one in the past, typically it's a part of a human resources book or something along those lines. But if you could pull that out and maybe create something for yourself and for your team, it'd be a great first step. So we'll talk about how you can access whatever questions are typically asked by individuals seeking your services. That's a good place to start. So excellent communication skills is typically the one thing you see in a resume, on a job description post. They're saying this is what we need of you if you're a potential candidate. That you have to effectively communicate program objectives to the different stakeholders, and that can mean your clients, your funders, etc. So this will include your ideas, your concepts, facts about your organization, orders, right? If you're in maintenance, certainly your work order system is a part of that, right? Being responsive to that work order system. Certainly in the instructions, how many times do you get off the phone and think to yourself, it's on the website, right? So, or we went over it at the community meeting. So I do think that to mitigate frustrations, we need to be clear and have that as well, that element as well. And of course, you have to convey feelings and opinions or elements of what your team would like to have conveyed, whether that's to council or to your board or any of your stakeholders, really. So how do we get there? So let's talk a little bit about what the average customer service experience is like today. The average customer spends 11 hours resolving a problem with a company. Why is that? A lot of times they sleep on it. They purchased the item, and it took a couple days for them to get the item in the first place because many of them are using Amazon or some other sort of, it's not necessarily your traditional buying experience. So that plays into the number of hours. Also, they're not sure how they want to communicate. So they may want to go back in the store. They may choose to use an online option. They may choose to call and wait for a call back. So many things play into the number of hours. But for yourself, take a minute to think, how if a client had an issue, how long does it take for them to resolve that issue in my community? So think about it from that perspective. 60% of customers say that they stopped doing business with a company because of poor customer service. You could certainly argue that in housing, you don't necessarily see them not using your services, but where would they go with that information, right? What tribal council member or board member would they stop, outside the office to discuss this issue? When you look at it from that perspective, you could say to yourself that if there's more that can be done to support customer service, then that's a good thing for your organization. 75% of customers expect a response to their customer service inquiry within 24 hours. So I think that most people aren't unreasonable. Certainly, if you have a maintenance issue it's water leaking or something along those lines, it's going to be expedited, right? You know that this is an emergency situation. But for the most general questions and things of that nature, typically they expect within 24 hours. And that's 75% of the population. So that's not, or excuse me, respondents of this survey. But that's not, that's a healthy number, I would think. 92% of customers say they're more likely to do business with companies that offer live support. So obviously in our environment, we don't necessarily offer those sort of services. However, I do wonder how many of you are using online intake forms, online responses, or some sort of opportunity to be able to maybe connect with individuals that's not face to face. I know that many in the beginning, some were dabbling with Facebook pages and things like that, but we find them to be unresponsive. Like if I go, many of the clients that I work with now, I go to those pages and they haven't had a post in months. Similar to websites, when customers go to websites, think of your own experiences. When you want to buy something and you go to a website and you see that it hasn't been updated in years, do you feel comfortable purchasing from that location? Probably not, right? So going along those lines, I think we can do a little bit more and of course, I know that your policies and procedures have to be updated to support that type of work. But these are this is the why behind its importance. 73% of customers say they're more likely to do business with companies that offer self-service options. So going back to things that you can do to empower your clients, these clients are no longer going into banks. They're not going into the grocery stores, right? They might even have the option of getting certain things shipped to them. And I know many of us live in remote areas where that's not a possibility. But for those who have tasted that, they are more likely to feel comfortable doing so. And so it's an option that maybe you should look into for your services. So list some companies here in the chat area that you tend to use the most. So what are some companies that you use, without even thinking? If you needed something, what's a company that comes to mind right away? So of course, Amazon is probably number one on our list, right? But let's see. I'm going to give you all a second with that. Google's another one. For certain, Google has made it to where they offer several different options for folks. So you're using Google even when you don't know you're using Google, which is kind of scary, but yeah. But you got to ask yourself why. Am I using them because they're fast? Well, in the case of Amazon, certainly 2-day shipping, you can't really. People were like, I don't know, confused when they came out with the idea that they would do things in 2 days. Now it's the norm. What about cheap? I mean, nobody put Walmart, but I will be the guilty party here and say that I go to Walmart, right? I think it's in their catchphrase that they everyday low prices, right? So I know it's cheap. Let's see here. Luxury. It might be that I go back to something because it provides me with a sense of luxury. But what is that? Is it luxury or is it something else? It's probably more so the experience, right? If I go to a Holiday Inn, that's nice. I'll check in. They'll give me my key. But if I go to a 4-star or 5-star hotel, I'm going to get a different experience, right? So it's a luxurious experience to know that I can take the robe with me when I leave, as opposed to getting charged for it. What about user friendly? Somebody said convenient or convenience. Certainly, we do a lot of our online work. When you're in that environment, there's nothing worse than going to a page and you're like, okay, I don't know how to use it. So user friendly matters. These are individuals that are using apps now on the regular. Their phone is a little computer. And so they're used to this convenience factor in almost every other element. So how can we implement that in our own world? And then lastly, quality. Of course, Instacart, values your what you're doing, which is essentially saying, I want you to go and pick up my food or pick up my gosh, they have so many different things they can pick up these days. But groceries is usually the number one. And if you open your bag and your bananas are all bruised, you'd feel some type of way. So I think that for certainly quality is a part of that. So going back to these, exactly what you've detailed to me, 86% of customers say that the way a company handles something is going to determine whether or not I go back to them, right? 68% of customers say that they're willing to pay more for a product if they think they're going to get or receive excellent customer service. 50% of customers switch to someone else, right? A competitor, after one experience. We don't necessarily have a competitor, but who we do have are other stakeholders, right? People who do business with us, or maybe our grantors, people who provide us with funding, or it's the tribal, it's either the board or the tribal council or whoever we report to. So they may not go to and switch competitors, but they're definitely going to talk about it. Which goes back to this next one. 70% say they're more likely to do business with a customer that has some sort of response, understanding the need for response time. And 72% say they'll be more likely to recommend a company. So also positive experience. We're not collecting that data, and we should be, because if we want to provide additional, get additional funding opportunities, then I think, our program outcomes and deliverables can add that. If we have that data, if we're collecting that. So, no one wants to put out a survey on whether or not we're doing so much as it is as a housing department that, it's like, do I really want to put that out there and have them critique us? But I think you can get some valuable knowledge in terms of, what you're doing well, and areas you need to improve. So of course, our housing communication has to include, the policies and the procedures under NAHASDA, under the tribe's code of conduct or your HR department's HR handbook. And of course, all of these things are included in that. Hopefully, anti-discrimination, privacy laws, confidentiality, department policies, the things that we wish we could update every year, but sometimes we don't get to it. So these are the kind of elements that you want to make sure, first and foremost, before you design anything new, that you're paying attention to what exists here in this world. The other thing I would say is, when we're looking at these documents, we have to also pay attention to any other funders that we have and some of the language that they use when it comes to, like, for example, PII, personal identifiable information, protecting that information. If we're thinking of going online, what does that look like with some of our intake forms and other things? Who's going to have access to it? So it's a little bit more complicated than just saying check for the policies and procedures or create your own. You will have to do some research. But for example, when I work with a client, I liken this to when you're doing a business evaluation. Think for profit. When you're doing any sort of business planning, you ask them for a business plan, and if they're already established, to see if they're healthy, what would you ask for? You'd ask for a profit loss statement. In the case of a nonprofit, or in our case, a housing department or TDHE, I'm going to ask for certainly these policies here, policies and procedures here, or whatever internal controls you have. But I may also say, do you have a client experience or interaction plan or something along those lines? What's that going to tell me? One, if your organization is valuing that experience, but two, that's a sign of a healthy organization. So I really do think it's an important factor. And of course, in that interaction plan, you'd have an external and internal interaction policy. So that's what that looks like. And it's basically detailing your professional expectations, both in person and written. Um, Also, it'll have a technology use policy to confirm that your employees are aware of the expectations that you have. Um, in addition to being able to convey all your program services. Um, I know that not everyone might be good at the day-to-day operations, right? You might have an admissions and an occupancy person who's not necessarily the most um, extrovert. And so maybe they're not warm and bubbly, but they know their policies and procedures. They know their programs and their services. And so I think that there has to be a balance there with being able to convey the information and also do the work. Um, Identifying that individual within your organization who's better at it than others can also help with this. But in terms of managing the interactions, certainly this person has to be able to convey programs and services. And unfortunately, I do know or have experienced circumstances where individuals are great at what they do, but conveying that to the client, not so much. They hand them the pamphlet and send them on their way, or they hand them the list of programs and says, or the list of requirements and say, here you go, this is what you need. And they don't have that elevated level of client or customer service. So we take communications for granted. I mean, that's just the reality of it. It's easy to take communications for granted because we do it every day. The average US worker spends 50% or more of their time communicating on ideas, policies, and information. So, customer service concerns. What kind of concerns do we experience? Certainly under our program applications, just people trying to apply for the services that we provide, the admissions or the eligibility of these applications. A lot of times, if people are denied, you're gonna get pushback, right? So, knowing that these are our frequently asked questions, what can we do to convey these policies better? Same with NAHASDA and program compliance. So, if you're looking at it from an internal perspective, and I know I see this amongst individuals that have tribal housing departments, right? So they're just one department under the umbrella of the tribe. In which case, maybe grants management doesn't understand their NAHASDA compliance, or maybe procurement doesn't understand their housing compliance, and there's some confusion there, right? So you all have to do a much better job of conveying that communication to the internal staff. So sometimes client service or customer service isn't just to those outside individuals, but internally within the organization. Of course, preventative maintenance. We would love to have all our tenants do exactly as we would like, so that they prevent maintenance issues. But also, to once an issue occurs under maintenance, we know that that can also be a pitfall area as well. Of course, inspections. When a person has left a home, sometimes that can turn into an issue. Rehabilitation of a home. If a person is using a certain service and they don't realize what, or they going back to whatever the responsibilities are for that client. And of course, emergency maintenance, as I said before. So applying these things means that it's important for us to have case studies or something that our staff can do, or we can have a team meeting, or just every once in a while, however you want to implement it within your organization. But sit back and say, what would an experience look like where we see an issue and our staff would have to resolve it. So in this particular case, and I'm just going to go ahead and read it, Sheila Welch has benefited from a housing rehabilitation program. However, her job with the BIA now requires her to travel, and she's never home. So she wants to sell her home and move in with her sister off reservation. Sheila has notified the housing authority that she will be putting the house up for sale soon, or that she wants to sell the home. Contact Sheila via email to remind her that due to useful life, she's unable to sell the home without repayment of the rehabilitation costs, right, of the housing department. So something like that could potentially happen within your organization. And if it's not something that you think would happen, then create one that you think would happen on your reservation or within your community, and how you would handle it. One, should it even start with an email, right? Would you want to verify once you're notified by Sheila that she's interested in doing this, what would you do first, second, third? So evaluating what that process looks like. Did she contact the right person? That's another element to this that I could start with in terms of, did the client know or feel comfortable contacting the right person, or was it just more convenient for her to start with maybe a program manager, someone who doesn't necessarily work with day-to-day intake? So those are the kind of questions you would ask. And throughout this presentation, we're going to have some case studies that we'll go over. I think we might have time to do one or two together, but I do think that there are opportunities with that particular case study for a communication failure. So think of a time when you had a failure and what did you do about it? Why did it occur? What impact did it have on both staff and or on your community? If you had a chance to do it over again, what would you do differently? Taking a step back and thinking about how many times we communicate with people and how it goes wrong will help you in the long run. So first, we have to take a step back and talk about communication as a process. Since we talk so much, we forget that it's a two-way street. The listener or the reader may either understand your message, understand a portion of your message, or miss the point entirely. So it's important that how you transmit the message matters. It's not enough to just deliver it, right? Sometimes we send an email and we're so confident. We're like, good, done, check mark. We are done with this. We've sent what needed to be sent. But I've heard it said, clarity is kindness. And so we can be more clear about what we want to send out. And it not just feel like a check mark, but feel like the other person has gotten the information. So how do we do that? What do we need to say? Well, we got to figure out what, when you're not paying attention to how you're communicating, then you're going to miss certain key behaviors, right? So let's talk about that. The first one is listening, right? You probably heard about active listening before, but active listening, especially with social media and all these other ways that we're distracted, we're not always listening to people, or even reading the emails. We're not paying attention. We've got so many things going on. I like to tell my kids, listen, we have computers. I am not a computer. You need to give me a second. Look for my eyes, make sure I have eye contact with you. If I don't, then I'm not listening. So active listening is super important because listening is voluntary. It's something that we just do naturally. How many of you have heard of driving that when we're on autopilot, we can just basically make it home without even thinking? Listening is a lot like that. We can do a lot without ever listening to the other person and agreeing to things, or providing them with a negative feeling without even trying, right? Because when you're active listening, these are the things that are happening. You don't just hear the words, you hear their thoughts, their beliefs, their feelings. It's empathetic in nature, and it takes work. It's not easy. So ask yourself, the last time a staff member communicated with you, were you actively listening? And the next time a client comes into the office, actively listen and see if that interaction isn't 10 times better. I can guarantee you it will be. So here's some things you can put in your communication toolbox. Decide to concentrate. That's number one. Empathize, as I said before. I think even more so after the pandemic, I feel like most people were just, when they describe 2020, they say it was more like 3 years instead of one, right? It's 3 years rolled into one. That's a lot of stress on people. And so observe their behaviors, their nonverbal, how they're standing with, I notice when I'm active listening that people stand taller, that they choose their words carefully. They're more likely to listen without an interruption, and vice versa. I'm listening without an interruption because I'm truly trying to hear what they have to say. So when I start speaking, they're less likely to interrupt me. I've gotten it, you know what I mean? And they can tell that I understand their issue. I ask, hey, this is what I'm hearing. Did I get this right? I want to know. I want to paraphrase or clarify to determine whether or not I've summarized their issue. And then I can provide feedback, like this is, and I get it. Some individuals are going to come to the office clearly upset, and it's your job to be able to say, I understand that you feel frustrated with the way the maintenance staff handled it, or the way the fact that your email or your phone call wasn't returned. But here's what we're going to do, right? And then respond. Then respond with whatever the policy, the procedure is, or how you yourself will address the issue. So definitely you can refer back to this list, but it's helped me with my responses as well. I can tell you that, especially when you work kind of alone or in a silo, not a silo, I have people that I work with, but I do feel sometimes that you're more likely to send an email off without pause when you're working by yourself, right? So a lot of times email can get me in trouble because if I just go off of feelings, then I'm more likely to send that email and feel like I've checked it off my list, rather than paying attention to whether or not it was clear, right? So email, text, social media, those elements have to have some mechanics, and we'll talk about that. Certainly, back in the day, your facts, your memos, your agendas, these things that you had to do for the purpose of the business world. Fax is kind of no longer a thing, but memo and agenda for sure. Fact sheets or flyers, uh, those things are things that are going out in the community. I'm hoping we can do like a Canva how to or something like that. But we're sending things out into the world, and people are so digitally graphic minded that we have to kind of compete with that to some extent. So there are ways around it as a housing authority, that I think we can start to at least make a dent. I mean, I've seen some just, they're sending out a flyer on homebuyer education class, and they're legit putting the policies and procedures right there on the flyer. I mean, it's just all words. And then, so if you're a visual person, you're not reading that. You're just not. And so it's a waste of the staff's time and energy, and it's also a waste of paper. So these sort of notices that we have to put out, press releases, project summaries, or presentations on behalf of our company, or excuse me, our organization, or those are the ones that we want to make sure we are looking at the mechanics, right? So let's see, how am I doing on time? I definitely think that we can hit the email and some other important ones. Before you hit reply, make sure you have on the right hat. Many of you are handling different roles and responsibilities within your organization, but make sure you sit back and you ask yourself, what is this person asking me for? What hat do I need to have on? Sometimes I need to clarify. I don't understand what they're asking for. Rather than answering them with something that is not important or valuable to them, ask them the question, or decide to pick up the phone and call them and say, I saw your email, but I don't understand. I think that's better than giving them something they don't need or want, and then now you've got this email that's going back and forth between you and the person who sent it. Of course, start with a polite greeting or intro. I've received emails in the past where, this goes back to internal services, right? Internal customer service. How am I honoring the experience if I don't start with a good morning or good evening or good afternoon? I think that the same is true in email, and sometimes we forget that. I think social media and texting for sure has kind of diluted how we respond to each other in emails, professional emails. But I do think that we kind of have to bring it back. And that just takes reminding the staff. Punctuation, also very important. I know I don't work within a tribal department where their IT doesn't allow for certain things. I personally have Grammarly and some other extensions that help me remind me, right, when to use a comma, when to use a question mark, those types of things. Obviously, I get that some folks are just trying to send out an email and get their point across, but punctuation is important, and I think it's something that again needs to be a reminder. It could be this could be a staff meeting, this could be like just one bullet on a staff reminder type thing, or it could be a part of your overall plan to kind of bring back consciousness and let everybody know that we're seeing some things that we need to address. So don't be sending the email angry. I always say, if you've got to send bad news, separate from a client or a vendor or something like that, if you're every employee knows when the email wasn't about them. I mean, I think that as managers, we can do better than sending the one email to everyone, even though it doesn't involve everyone. But how can we do that, right? Being more conscious. Typically, I say walk away because you're never going to get it right the first time. So if you're concerned about how it's going to go down, or how you think people will respond to the email, then I'd say walk away. Best thing you could do is come back to it tomorrow. As I said before, they're expecting something within 24 hours, so you don't have to respond right away. Taking that little bit of control back will help you make a much better point the next day. So select your words, make every word count. Avoid, I know it's hard. We speak in HUD, IHP, APR, light tech. We say these things, but what do they mean? For some people, they don't know. And so you're excluding individuals sometimes when we speak. So I would say be careful with that. Using the names of the personnel and the facilities. I know that we've got a lot of family names and names we call folks, and then other staff's not, how are we excluding other staff sometimes when we use names for individuals, and then we don't necessarily know, or the other person can't necessarily do the same, right? I've had it happen in the office where, I'm like, okay, I know this person as XYZ, and we can be more inclusive that way if we just let folks know. Let's see, omit unnecessary details. I have a hard time with this. As I told you before, I love writing and I love talking. And so sometimes I talk a little too much. If I'm honest, I wouldn't tell my husband that. But I do think that when you are a talker, sometimes you can add things in that aren't necessary. I always reevaluate my emails and say, can I do it in less words, right? Speak in sync with others, with other related authorities. What do I mean by that? So remember your audience. There's a time that you're speaking with tribal council or your board, and then there's the time when you're communicating with your community, right? In which case, if it's a flyer, it might be a little less formal. So, and also be aware, right? I've gone to meetings where, the person who was hosting it didn't scan the room, and so they omitted having chairman speak or chairwoman speak or something like that. And, so we want to be mindful of that. Keep messages consistent across various medias. So I have also seen where a policy was updated in one place and not in another, and that creates lots of confusion. So keep it consistent. Have a checklist. If we're changing one thing, here's the following places that we need to change it. So email, there's some more about that. Of course, subject lines are helpful. I cannot stress them enough. These are things to help us organize as we navigate the day. And it's really hard to keep up with things or search for things if we don't have a subject line. And then be careful with confidential information. You don't want things in the wrong hands. And there could be some legal repercussions too, depending on the sensitivity level of the information. Reply all. I think we've all probably been on an email that we shouldn't have been on, or it gets kind of annoying when someone hits reply all. So before hitting reply all, pay attention to what is being requested. Whether you need to hit reply all is really almost the answer is probably no. If you're just saying thanks, think about it. Now that's going back to 150 people who really don't care as much about your response. So writing replies, provide supporting information, a solid conclusion. This just gives you like the mechanics behind writing your reply to an individual. Texting. So if you're texting colleagues, bosses, employees, customers, vendors, there are a few etiquette rules you need to know. So abbreviations, be mindful of that. Beware of your tone. Texting is so tough to evaluate because sometimes what people read and what people meant is two different things. Going back to that two-way communication streak, I think that it's important that there's certain things we're not conveying because it can't come across as well in a text. Negative feedback, certainly. Meetings and appointments. I'll have it seen where somebody set up a meeting in an email and then they texted to cancel. And it's like, well, what if I don't see that text or that appointment? When I'm at work and I'm in work mode, going back to, which hat am I wearing? I'm more likely to check my email for a cancellation of a meeting than a text. And then also voice to text. We've all seen it happen where people put one thing and autocorrect puts another. Same with emails. And now it's even more so. Did you mean to say that or send that? Is important. And I would stay away from emojis in general. I think you're talking to an employee, not a friend or a family member. And so oftentimes, and I'm guilty of it, I'll be honest, in terms of liking to use emojis. I think I used one in the chat just now or earlier. It's convenient and it's cheeky and it's fun, but it's also work. So I'd be careful with that. So with a call, organize yourself first before placing the call. These are the types of things where, I've had certain trainings where people have got their hands folded and are like, I know this already. But a lot of times we forget, myself included. As long as I've been doing this, there are times that I get on a call with someone and I don't have the information in front of me. So get organized before placing a call. Whenever possible, identify yourself and the program you represent. I have had it happen where people call me and it's like before I can even get started, I have to go back with who are you and what organization do you represent, right? So being careful with that. When you're leaving a message, people tend to say that they're not going to respond or not listen to phone messages anymore, and I get that. But if your organization still relies on it, then you should be using it, right? Leaving a name, a number, and a brief message for the tenant, speaking slower but not softer. This is a big one. A lot of people, they'll speak slower, but then they're also speaking softer, and then the person can't hear what they've said. Keep it short and professional, and make sure that you have some sort of purpose to the call, where they need to be given a direction. Like, so what's supposed to happen next? I've gotten this call. Is it just for information? Is there some sort of action that needs to take place? Like, make sure you make it clear what has to happen next, right? So for your voicemail, there's a rule of thumb there for that. So here's another client experience case study. You know what? And I think we'll run through this one in the chat area. So May Shelby has reviewed and submitted all the requirements to apply to a rental assistance program. Her cousin Joyce informed her that she only had to wait 1 week for the rental assistance decision. May turned in her application 4 weeks ago. She called the office and was transferred to a mailbox that is now full. She recently called the office and left a message with the receptionist. Discuss why May feels the process is taking too long. As the program assistant for RAP, address the situation using the methods we discussed in your phone call to May, right? So what would you do in this particular situation? What would a response look like? And who should be the first person to respond back to May? So let's put this in the chat area and break it down. What would you all do? Tenant manager, let's see, I got Sine Mohawk. She's a tenant manager. So if you were going to respond, what would you respond with? I also have Melinda. She's a housing manager, support specialist. Start with a tenant manager for sure. I think it would be frustrating if she got a call back from the receptionist, correct? Because can the receptionist herself, even though she's trying to be responsive to May, because she's waited along, what new information does she have to provide her? Not much. And so this kind of means that internally there has to be a discussion amongst staff as to how to handle these certain sort of situations. And so that's one of them. I agree. What else? It could be that the typical process takes 4 weeks, right? It's as far as the approval process goes, and that this information that she's received from her cousin isn't necessarily valid. But can she say that, and how would she say that? Of course, yeah, I agree. The employee who's tasked to take the application after intake should be the one to respond. And let's say that this person has to call back. It's possible that they are waiting on, let's see here. Sorry, I lost it. They're waiting on the verifications to come back. Correct. So there could be reasons why it didn't take as long for her cousin as as it does herself. And so conveying that when she picked up the application, should where would she have found that information out at? Where should it be? Is the response time anywhere she can reference that might help? Explain that every application process and situation is different. They are still processing this information. Correct. I think, Kathleen, that's a great response to a disclaimer that should be at the beginning or somewhere in the application for them to see. Franny says the process may take longer because we do a background check. That can take anywhere from 30 minutes to 30 days. Wow. So we have to wait for a background check. And so going back to customer service and client experience, the difficulty that we have with this concept is that we also have um, a process of evaluation and compliance that we need to have in place that our clients are not aware of. They in no way understand or know about these things. Do I believe we need to give them an in-depth understanding of compliance and internal controls? No, that's not what they're here for. But I do think that every application and its process should be available to folks so that we can reference it. So that would be my first step, which is to say, I am not speaking. I believe your cousin Joyce's process took the time that she said, because oftentimes they'll say, "Well, are you calling my cousin a liar?" Um, but also too, I think once you get an application, you can call and say we've received it, right? That could be something that we add to this process moving forward. We received your application. We wanted to acknowledge that we received your application. Here are the next steps. So that's one possible solution so it doesn't happen again. The other thing is you can, let's see here, after 10 days, they should know if they're missing documents. Exactly, right? So maybe after 10 days, you're missing certain documentation, the application is not complete, right? That's another reason we find folks um, are waiting because there's documentation we need from them. Maybe, in another life, we might have said, "Oh, check the receipts. I emailed you on such and such date. I called you on this date to let you and left the message to let you know that your application didn't have the following," right? Um, that's true too. Her cousin might have had an emergency situation, but oftentimes I think if you go down the road of communicating another person's situation, then one, there's a confidentiality pitfall, right? You might fall down that hole of giving information out that probably they shouldn't know of. But two, I think you want to keep it positive and and let them know that what you can do, right, for the circumstance or the situation. But I agree. I think all of these just this one little case study brings out all of the elements that I think highlight why evaluating your interactions with people are so important for your organization. And so I appreciate all of your comments. I think they're all important elements that we can, tear it apart and then put it back together in a way that works for your group. So that's what I suggest you all do. Um, because I think um, it's really hard when, especially with some of the basic stuff, it's like I already know this stuff, or I've been a professional, housing professional for, and many of our staff have been around longer than we've been there, right? So it's really hard to tell them something new, I think sometimes, or remind them of these things without them feeling frustrated. So these case studies that you're going to see throughout the presentation help to highlight, ways that they could approach it um, without without thinking, because sometimes again, going back to autopilot and how we do things, um, we can make mistakes. So this is a good one for that. Let's see here. Outreach to the community. The goal isn't to know everything about everything. I think it's presenting isn't a high level of skills. I think it's more so about consistency. I personally don't know everything in the room. Based on your titles, I can tell that, we, as a group, we are going to get to the heart of, customer service here. And what works for one organization may not work for the other. The main thing with presenting is to be authentic, right? I'm telling you that I know about certain things, but I don't know everything about everything. I'm bringing to you what I know. I'm also honoring the information that you all know and bring to the table. So think about that when you've got staff that are hesitant to provide information to clients. It's really important that they're solid on certain things. The individual briefings, the phone conversations, public speaking efforts, and then also interviews that they might have with external clients, right? Your vendors, they're communicating with vendors, they're communicating with funders, etc. So a lot of times when people are asked to present, they get frustrated. Like, yes, I do what I do on the daily, but I don't want to talk about program services, policies and procedures, reports, budgets, ideas, or things that could show impact, like how we're treating our clients. So what impacts your audience is important. Who you're talking to matters. So defining that first. I would scrap the one size fits all approach. And so these are elements that you would use when you're trying to convey information outside to the public, right? So identify the challenge. We already said before with that last case study, for sure we want to put that one size doesn't fit all, and that the application process will have an element. Maybe you can define those expectations as far as when a person will contact you regarding your application. If an item is missing within your application, that can prolong the process, and maybe it'll help them fill out the application more accurately, things like that. So identifying the challenge, quantifying the impact, specifying your need, right? All ways that you can address customer service issues, but then propose your solution, sell whatever advantage you have to, if you're talking to a funder, for example, let's say that funder wants to know about your client experience, a positive one, right? You just helped another family enter a home, whether that's first-time home buyer or through rental. But make sure you let them know the positives as well, because I think too often we're focused on the negatives that clients might mention, and we're not paying attention to how we're conveying all the positive things that we're doing as well. So choose the most effective communication tool. Make sure you're managing your time, because sometimes we're just so busy that's the issue. And we need to carve out time for flyers and carve out time for annual performance report, right? Not in the sense of what we submit to HUD or ONAP, but what can we take from that report and turn it into something that we can show the community, right? So think about those positives that we want to convey, and be mindful of the immediate reactions that they'll have, right? We can't just publish what we put in an APR and print it out and hand it to the general public. That won't work. But we have to have time to be able to do that. And I think sometimes that's the biggest pitfall to conveying how well we're doing as an organization, because we just don't have the time. We haven't planned for that. So follow-up is important. I think that that's another element that we don't always realize conveys a positive or negative experience. When we don't follow up, what do people feel? When we don't follow up with others, it can appear as rude, as arrogant, inconsiderate of time and feelings. It can be interpreted as self-centered, right? Because if a person is constantly responding to you within a timely manner and you never hear back from them, or you're constantly having to follow up with them, it does make you feel frustrated, angry, confused by the lack of communication. This happens every day internally within departments. There's some departments that you call and you're so happy to call them because they respond in a timely manner, versus others that you're dreading because you're not going to get the kind of follow-up that you need. So the last note on follow-up is try to be proactive, right? Let them know why that your request is timely, right? Maintain a healthy and strong relationship with folks by following up. Carve out time for follow up, right? Because that's the other element to this. As program managers, some of you may be super busy and just not. It's not that you don't want to follow up with folks, but they're on a long line of lists. I went to a time management course one time, and she said, take whatever's on your desk and flip it over, right? Because the ones on the bottom, right, the requests on the bottom or the things that you're supposed to do on the bottom have been sitting there for so long. Meanwhile, other things have now piled on top of it. Same is true of your of your mailbox, right? Maybe you there's a tab where you can flip it from first received to the last thing received. Go back in there and make sure you've responded to folks. So just thinking about it from that perspective. So before you send your communication, make sure you go through this checklist of, what information should be provided. Is it most effective to send it in an email? If I should send it if I should make a phone call or wait till I see this person in person, would that be more effective? Things like that. So the other thing about feedback is that you got to collect it, right? Your clients could be external or internal. I've got Gayleen in the room. She's an internal client to myself, right? When I submit my RFP, I confirm with her that she's received it, or OISTA, I confirm she's received it. Once I'm done with the webinar, she confirms with me that she's gotten my invoice, etc. So in person or online. How many of you are currently using any sort of online application process for any of your services? I wonder about that. So put that in the chat area for me. Going back to that case study, could there have been some sort of, if it was an online submission, then once it's submitted, what would happen? Perhaps they get an auto email letting them know what the process looks like. What else could have happened if it was online? Maybe it doesn't get submitted unless every field is complete and every document accounted for, right? So that's maybe another way of confirming that individual or that other level of accountability, making sure that they had, or maybe there was a checklist online that they could have referenced to make sure that their application was complete. If let them know if you're missing something within the application, then that can delay the process. So I think that we can do more. I know that sometimes building these things can be costly, but I do think that paying attention to, especially now, it's not as expensive as it used to be. So it is an option for future planning. Let's see, I forget when in the fiscal year, some folks do it early, but when you're looking at your IHP, think about adding some time, staff time and energy towards, converting some of this stuff to online if possible. Where did they come from, right? If it's a vendor, then of course, maybe they're working with other departments. It could be that there's a little bit of a confusion because different departments do things differently. Why did they choose you? In the case of client focus. So good impressions matter too. When you're talking to someone in person, your actions, right? How you are paying attention, that eye contact, as I mentioned before, matters. So actions are 55% of it. The tone, obviously I'm excited about customer service. If I didn't sound excited about customer service, this would not be the best webinar for experience. I could tell you that much. Are there folks that just naturally speak in monotone? Sure. But I think your tone matters. And then also words. I think, of course, what we say matters, but a lot of times you're knowing how physically people are paying attention to that because we're all visual. Tone, what they hear is important. 7% of your words are being processed. So does anyone on this webinar have an online intake process established? And that's a really great question. Thank you for asking it. Let's see. Well, I know that to sign up, everyone signed up via the NLC's Cathedral online. So that's kind of, sort of. But Let's see here. Anybody have an online intake process? I know that many individuals have or organizations have their PDFs available online for folks to download. Some of those PDFs have fillable areas, some do not. Let's see. Lynn says that they have um, an online process. So people can fill out an application and send it in via email. Yeah, that's what I typically see, is that they can download the application, fill it out as a PDF, and then save it as a PDF and send it. Let's see here. And so some are, yeah, through a portal, and typically the portal, I mean, I would say after today's webinar, we could definitely try to put together a list of kind of like what those um, developers look like, or if there's a group that you've used that you want to share with folks. We can definitely, you can send it to Awista. Awista, do you want to put your email in the chat? I think that would be helpful for folks. And then we can kind of, obviously every organization can determine what works best for them. Perfect. Thank you. So going back to the methods, right? Things that you can do with your staff. The first one that I always implement is learn. I want, especially listening is so helpful. I want to make sure that we're listening, we're empathizing, we're apologizing, we resolve whatever issue it is, and we do it immediately, right? It has to be timely. So when I have a question, and this is true of even, hold on, I've got a mouse issue. There we go. So going back to the method, even in the class, this is typically what I would do, right? I listen, or in this case, I'm reading what is being said. I empathize whenever I can because I do understand some of the issues, or in the case of wanting to repeat what's being asked so that I can answer correctly. If I need to apologize, that's typically the first thing I'll do is I say, I'm sorry for the experience that you had. Does that take anything away from me personally? Is it my fault? No. But I think that it's important that we acknowledge and apologize on behalf of the experience that the client had. It takes nothing to do so. I think that that's typically why people don't apologize and give clients that. And then I try to resolve it as soon as possible. When I don't know let's say someone asks a question, and I'll ask, does anybody have any questions? Someone asked me a question I don't know. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to apologize. I don't have that information, but what I can do is collect an email, or what I can do is connect with staff over at ONAP and find out, and then I can get back to you, right? So I give them some sort of resolution as soon as I can. If I'm in the middle of a training and I don't have that information, and then I resolve it immediately. Typically, a training will end, and that's when I make sure that all of the things that I promised get delivered. And that shows that level of care that I have. And the same is true for any interaction you have with your clients. So when a client is ignored, they feel rejected. Science has shown us that when there's no eye contact or it's silent, then they feel unimportant. When a client is doubted, going back to that first case study, they feel embarrassed, right? So if I were to call Joyce's cousin not accurate, right, then they'd feel like, okay, well, either she's giving me the wrong information or you're giving me the wrong information, right? And that's not a good look for the organization. But when there's no solution, they also feel cheated, right? And in her case, since she's pitting up her experience against another person, then yeah, she's very unhappy. So how do you respond to complaints? Well, they're your most unhappy customer, and in your case, client, is your greatest source of learning. And that's from Bill Gates. So, when you're putting a customer on hold, be mindful of what that's going to make them feel like. Transferring a call, same thing. We've all been transferred back and forth and we hate it, right? Taking a message, only take the message if you think you're going to be able to get a response back. I find that a lot of times people will say, okay, I got your information and I'll have so-and-so call you back. When that person doesn't call your client back, then now you've also taken a hit, as the person who took the message down, right? So yeah, Melanie's absolutely right. Acknowledging a concern or a frustration goes a long way with connecting with the person on the other end of the call. So when you're ending the call, be mindful of that. Responding to an email, make sure that you're avoiding these things. Flat out no, which I've heard it. On when that happens, you take pause as the person. You're like, wait a minute, did she just tell me no, like, and not even give me an explanation? He or she, or they, I don't know. That's not my job or department. You're right. That is bad. So that's kind of like that commiserating with the client. I've had staff that they thought they were empathizing, but you're right. As bad as it is bad is different because you're now putting that on the department. So be careful with, there's empathizing and then there's putting it back on another person within the department. You're right. She is the worst. Let me tell you what she did last week. That kind of thing. Amongst the staff, that can also not be a good thing. Telling a person to calm down negates how they're feeling completely, and it usually escalates the situation. Call me back. Typically, if someone's calling you on a service related, from a service perspective, then the best thing you can do is you be the one to provide that response back, as opposed to telling the client to call back. And then that's not my fault. Be that as it may, you're a representative of the organization. And so, these are better phrases. And I just tape them up against the wall and use them whenever I can. I will find out, or let's find out together, right? That's a good one. You know what? I don't know that answer. Let's find out together. Here's what I can do, right? I can't give you the names of companies because I don't necessarily like to put one company out there as it kind of looks like solicitation in a webinar format. But if other peers want to go ahead and provide, different vendors and whatnot, put it in the chat, right? So you've seen that already. What I can do is, I understand your frustration because I do. I'll be back with you in a moment, giving them some sort of expectation, or I'll be back. I'm going to go ahead and put this in and leave this message. And then in 2 days, I'm going to call you back just to verify that you've received the phone call back, right? What is your number so that I can get this information? I can't tell you what it's like when you're on the phone with someone and they say someone's going to call you back and then they hang up and for a fact they haven't taken your number down, right? So people forget that they do these things. It's not that they're trying to do it on purpose. It's just I also know on the flip side, they're trying to fill out a new grant that's due yesterday, right? They're also got clients maybe coming into the office, maybe clients, maybe there's a tribal council meeting and they're preparing for whatever report that needs to be given. So there's a lot of reasons we forget these things, but the main thing is to know that they're not alone, and you just have to be reminded, we are terribly sorry, and how can we solve this issue, right? So the first thing is listening. As I said, avoid snap judgments, apologize, acknowledge limits, and limit the point of contacts. POCs is point of contacts. If you can, as in the case of the receptionist, she's not the one for the job. Make sure that you limit that point of contact rather than having her call the client back. Make sure that the next person knows what. A lot of times we'll say, oh, just call her back and tell her XYZ. No, I think considering how long she's been waiting, that's going to be more frustrating to her that she didn't speak to a manager. Ask questions, making sure you understand the problem itself, act and inform. Here's what I can do for you now, follow up. So all of these are here for you. I think we've talked a lot about, how people react to things. It says 96% of customers have received bad customer service. 91% of customers don't tell the company about the experience, right? Unless you count the Twitter group that communicates with them via Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. But the majority of people will tell people about a bad experience, right? So think about email, chat options, or auto response, I would say more so than live chat. But social media, right? There is that element that we have to eventually start to address, because I guarantee you there's negative information about your housing department or housing organization that's on there that you're not aware of. So it's better to be proactive, I think, and start thinking about what your policy or procedure might look like in that space. Messaging, right? So, I used to work in the education department, and you could call a student till you're blue in the face. You send them a text and they send it right back. Like it would take 2 seconds and that was just something we noticed, and said, how do we as a staff get behind this and be more responsive to our students? And the best thing to do was to start messaging them, or give them options, right? Because of course, in that environment, we had to work with our IT department as well, because now you're getting off the grid, right? We also want to make sure it's a professional relationship with our students. So mobile apps are a good option as well. Going back to the question before, this is just a chance for you to take a minute. With all that you have to do, it's nice to take a minute, step back out, and say, okay, what could we potentially do to make the client experience better? Customer service hall of blame, typically large cell phone providers, retailers, auto repair, banks. You don't want to add and two, when you're working with different departments, we all know which departments we like working with and which ones, kind of aren't as good with follow up as others. So being mindful of that, maybe there's something we can do working with another department. I oftentimes see that we're all fighting for the same group of people. We might as well collaborate. When there's positive interaction amongst the departments, typically people are more likely to talk about the positive things that are happening within the departments versus the negative, right? Because I think on some level, when it's negativity can kind of spread. The other thing, is punctuality, right? So kind of how we interact with our staff and interact with our vendors and our clients. If you're early, you're on time, and if you're on time, you're late. Kind of what is that, a golden rule? Reminders to say the following: my apologies, my pleasure, may I help you, please, thank you, you're welcome. Those things take nothing, but feedback is going to be your greatest asset. Even at the end of this webinar, I'm going to get feedback, and it's going to help me improve the webinar for the next time, right? There's going to be that, what about XYZ that I didn't think of that might be valuable to you all for the next time this webinar takes place, right? So think about your frequently asked questions and try to find a way to solve them, right? Because if they're asking a question, it's worth looking into. The other element to this is that we've got different generations, and how we communicate with them is all going to look different. A generation is an identifiable group, and that they share the same birth years, age, location, life events. And so they have that shared experience. Now, does that mean that they have the same thoughts, the same values, the behaviors, the reactions? Not always. We have to take into account personality, gender, economy, things like that. But I do think that for the most part, generations have so many shared experiences that how they react in the workplace does play into a conversation that our staff should have. So workforce by the numbers, especially in tribal housing, the average retirement age is 64 in the US. It's much higher in the tribal communities, right? So I would say people like staying and work, serving their community. Oftentimes it's as far as just the sheer number of jobs available, in remote locations, it's a great position to continue serving. So people stay much longer in these roles and don't retire. So the silent generation, also known as the greatest generation, and we'll talk about the years, but essentially they make up 2% of the population. My grandmother didn't retire. Gosh, she was 80 when she retired, and she's a CNA. She was taking care of people younger than her. It was crazy. Baby boomers, they are 18% of the population, of the workforce population, I should say. Generation X is 34.8%. At first I thought this number would be a bit higher, but Generation X is a little edgy. And so I think this is your entrepreneurial group right now. So they're kind of saying, I don't want to work in a traditional environment, and they're doing some stuff on their own. Millennials make up 38.6%, so pretty darn close to tie, kind of a tie between the two. Gen Z, they're coming up and they are 6.1% of the population. So, how we communicate in the workforce, we've got folks that didn't have the internet and folks that grew up with Amazon Prime 2-day shipping, right? So that's going to play into how we communicate with each other. Yeah. So traditionally, generational, what are they called? The greatest generation. That's this group here, 1922 to 1943. Morgan Freeman, think Tony Bennett, just recently he passed, but they are loyal to the organization. They don't say much, but they listen a lot. They're respectful of authority. That's just the way in which their mindset has worked. When it comes to the workforce environment, whoever's their immediate supervisor, there's no discussion or conversation with anyone above that. They expect delayed rewards. They're typically not looking for instant gratification. They're uncomfortable with conflict. So they, as well as the baby boomers, are probably less likely to send an email directly to one person, but that general email that we all dread. Thorough and hardworking. We can all. My grandmother can run circles around me even now. It's just the nature of that and of what they had to go through in terms of the number of wars and the level of traditional and cultural aspects of how they grew up. Baby boomers are a little different. They're fun. They like to have a little bit more fun. But 1944 to 1965, they saw a lot of cultural changes. I think they called Tom Hanks like America's dad or something like that. They're optimistic. The glass is half full with them for the most part. They're service oriented. So this is why they're not retiring. You're not going to see, I think Greatest Generation just kind of said, okay, it's your turn. And they gave up the reins, no questions asked. Whereas this group, I don't think they'll ever retire. All about relationship. This is the group that created the potluck, right? Let's do things as a team. They're all about process. They also invented the binder, right? They love a good binder with the process and procedures in place. But they're team oriented. That's just the nature of how they like to do their work. So they oftentimes like to have a lot of meetings, which can also create conflict amongst the staff. So this going back to how we communicate with each other. Gen Xers, right? If you know Blake Shelton, he's pretty cynical. He was on The Voice, and so some of the things that he would say was informal, casual, direct in terms of the communication. They just want to. They don't want those mass emails, right? Talk to whoever you need to talk to, get it over with. This is what I was saying before about the Gen Xers. That's why many of them leave the workforce. They're not as many as they used to be in the workforce. That number could be higher, and it's not. So they're self-reliant. They kind of want to work on their own. They want work-life balance, right? They're the ones who brought that. Casual Fridays, that's them. Millennials, this group, Steph Curry and his millennials, 1982 to 2000, chose Under Armour over Nike, which was a big deal at the time. So some people would say Under Armour is the new Nike, but essentially what happened? He said, I want to go small. I want to go social consciousness. This company, Nike, makes all this money. What do they give back to their community? That kind of thing. But they're confident. They're assertive. Sometimes a little too much, right? They go straight to the top without having talked to their immediate supervisor. They did get a lot of praise in school, right? They got rainbows and clouds instead of A's and B's. And so they like to know when they're doing a good job. As a manager, you kind of have to pour into them a little bit more than you would other generations. As I said, globally minded. So what does that mean? They have an ability to multitask. So going back to, they would love for you and your organization to switch over to an online application. You're going to have a spread of people within your group, which is why I bring it up, that are going to say, I don't want to move to online applications. I don't want to move to providing Facebook updates or opportunities for people to learn information about our group on Facebook, I think that's going to create more of an issue for us in the long run, right? So you're going to get some pushback. So it used to be that millennials didn't have as many issues, right? But here now, recently, millennials have experienced, let's see, 9/11, right? They experienced the downturn of the housing market. They experienced the upturn of the housing market. I read yesterday that the median house in America is $412,000. That's insane. The affordability issue is huge for them, and I mean even more so in our communities, but just in general, like think about that for a second. They of course, and then they just dealt with COVID, right? So they're exhausted. This is typically why they don't stay long within one organization, so that loyalty factor is kind of not there, kind of pitting them up against each other. And then these kids are actually a little older than from reservation dogs than younger than millennials. They are considered Generation Z, so born 1996 and on. They account for 1/3 of the U.S. population. They're also called I generation or post millennial, less focused on day-to-day activities. They're better at multitasking, but less focused because they've got just so many options, right? When they send a message, they could send it on 5 or 6 different platforms. Not focused on bargains. They tend to just buy whatever is needed. Learning doesn't have to be institutional or formal. No more binders, more YouTube, right? So think about that if you're doing or designing any sort of training for your staff. They all want to know what's the Wi-Fi code, right? They were born with this stuff, so they're born social. Moving forward, where do we go from here? Generation Alpha is the youngest generation. They're the first group to be born in the 21st century. They are the first generation to be born with parents who grew up with the internet, cell phone, tablets, and social media. So what's that going to look like, right? In the future, now that the parents aren't, my parents didn't know anything about what the internet was. In this particular case, I know more for my kids. So it's going to be interesting to see how we navigate parenting teens in this environment. They also are more inclined to be racially diverse and the most technologically adept, right? So just meaning they are going to be a diverse group that wants to see people and within the workforce that look like them, so they can identify with the culture that we have, which goes back to why I think doing certain things online will be helpful. I think that's just the culture that they've grown up with now. And so they'll be more comfortable with that. And if you set those expectations early, you'll be in a better place. The oldest person in this group is 10 years old today, right? So just some things you can do with your staff. You can name that tune, right? It's typically songs bring you back to where you were. And it's a fun game that I like to play in the on-site trainings. But yeah, you can name that tune with the staff and show them where these songs line up, right? You can talk about the characteristics. What characteristics do you think they have, and what characteristics in the workplace do they have? Or we can try to identify if your staff is comfortable with names, like putting people with the names and things like that. I've done it both ways, just depends. But going back to client experiences, and we don't have time to go through all of them, but these are located in the files area. What you can do is kind of look at it from a perspective of generation. So in this particular case, Charlie has come back home to take care of his elderly mother. She resides in a 1-bedroom apartment. Charlie has called the office to find out details to qualify for rental assistance, but he's told that it requires a 1-year lease. Charlie questions the policy and hangs up. Use the discussion on empathy to determine why Charlie might disagree with the policy. And have you ever made an effort to call a upset customer back, right? So everybody knows Charlie's number. Why not call him back? What would that look like? Without changing your position regarding the policy, right? Because the policy is what it is. Call Charlie back using the methods we discussed. Also, I'd go as far as to say, knowing the generation that Charlie comes from, and that strong sense of community that he has, and support for his elders, what would that look like? What would you have to say? Chelsea Mitchell, here's another study in which case she meets all the income requirements for college housing assistance. In selecting her courses, she notices the required Apache cultural curriculum, and it doesn't fit with her current work schedule, right? So now what is she going to do? She's emailed the program coordinator to ask for guidance. Of course, she went straight to an email because that's where she feels comfortable generationally. But initiate an email. I would go as far as to say, what would that look like based on just the generational differences we just discussed. Here's another one, and I think this is the last one. I wanted to make sure we had maintenance in here because typically that's one of the biggest committers. I think they're so busy and so understaffed that it can sometimes be overwhelming to respond to every complaint. And so in this particular case, let's see here, the Harbor Housing Authority is responsible for all routine and preventative maintenance. Routine maintenance is the unplanned response to issues that arise due to normal wear and tear. So this isn't even an emergency. Maintenance technicians should respond to requests within 48 hours and repaired within a reasonable timeline. Discuss the policy with a coworker who is upset about the angry phone calls that he or she gets from the tenants when the work order timelines change and the tenants have not been notified. Right? So these are all case studies that you all can do with your staff, or you can update and change to meet your needs based on your frequently asked questions. But how do we all work together, right? How do we work with our clients to make their experiences better? We have to acknowledge the differences, create some communication plans, and consistently evaluate what we're doing with the interactions we're having. I don't think we do that enough. I know that from a funding perspective, we get the value of surveys because the data that's out there for our communities is lacking, right? So when we do community needs assessments and things like that, typically we're collecting the right data because we want to show our funders we have these needs, we want them met. I think that customer service is just as important. Sharing how well we're doing in our communities to support the housing need is important, and we should be collecting it. So in summary, I think professional and courteous interactions are key, and it's a responsibility of tribal housing to acknowledge that. Communication takes different forms, as we talked about. Proper planning will help determine what is best for you and your organization. Reduce email and other communication errors with proper planning and practice. Use the techniques like we talked about, the LEARN method, and others to address these negative interactions, but in a positive manner. And then, of course, understanding generational differences and using those differences to find commonality is important. I think, the cost of living is just higher than it's ever been. I don't think that people are going to retire surely based on the US retirement age, which is 65. I think it's their finances, think about how many of us are going to be caregivers for our family in the future. So if we want to retain our workforce, we're going to have to do some of these trainings and get folks aware of not just generational, but diversity, inclusion, and other ways that we can help mitigate issues from an internal perspective, right? The relationships that we have internally with our staff, with our vendors, with our clients, with our funders, to be able to create more positive interactions. So with that, are there any questions? Any questions? Well, I'm still going to be in the room for a little bit longer, but so if there are any questions, you can feel free to put them in the chat area. Last week we talked about, not last week. On Tuesday we talked about, what was Tuesday? Gosh, was it really that long ago? We talked about, help me out here, Owista. What was Tuesday? Gosh. Tuesday's webinar was on Yes, you are able to receive the slides. They're available in the chat, excuse me, in the area that says files. You can download it there. But I have,
It was
go ahead.
succession planning, Marie.
Oh, thank you. Gosh, it's been a long week. So the reason why I brought it up is, as I said before, when I look for an organization and how healthy they are, things like customer service plans or client relations plans, things like succession planning. It's another essential tool, going back to our discussion on generational differences, that I think is super important, right? So that webinar, along with this one, is recorded, and so you're able to find those in the Cathedral online. So as far as the presentation goes that was just shared, the only thing that's different than the slides provided is the case studies. That's in a separate PDF, just so that you can, I wanted you to be able to break it apart and do what you want to do to it for your group. Going back to avoiding one size fits all. Also, two questions that I ask in the presentation are sometimes not in the actual slides. Okay, cool. So yeah, and as Awista said, all of the recordings are posted on the nativelearningcenter.com under recorded webinars tab. So there is something else in the chat. Let me just make sure I acknowledge it. Sorry, my chat is super small compared to yours. So it says, we can agree customers might, family and village, tribal members, sometimes I feel like it's walking a thin line. This is true. I mean, we have the added, you know, I know in other or corporate experiences, there's less of a familial or relationship, you know, line that has to be drawn to, because you've got family members that are working within your departments that are serving other family members, right? So it can be a delicate balance. You're absolutely right with that. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate the kind words. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and toss over the presentation to the Native Learning Center, but I do appreciate being here today. Thank you all for coming, and I will see you all next time.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much, Marie. We greatly appreciate another amazing webinar, as always. Okay, I went ahead and launched the survey. I'm going to launch it one more time. The survey greatly helps Marie, letting her know what you guys would like to see on the next webinar, what you guys currently liked on this webinar, and what you would like to see more of. Please fill out the survey. It does greatly help us. We appreciate everybody that does fill out the survey. Our next webinar is going to be August 1st. It's Fundamentals of Developing a Tribal Nonprofit Part 1, presented by Vincent Franco, founder and owner of Next Venture Consulting, LLC. As always, registration is free. It'll be at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central, 12 p.m. Mountain, and 11 a.m. Pacific, and 10 a.m. Alaska. As always, you can access any of our recordings, including this one, on our website, www.nativelearningcenter.com, under the Recorded Webinars Kadita tab. This webinar recording will be posted within 24 to 48 hours, so please keep an eye out for it. As always, please check out our upcoming events on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. We even have a podcast called Hopathanga Native American Podcast, and you can find that on Spotify, Google Podcast, and Apple Podcast. And Simplecast, of course. Thank you once again for joining us for today's webinar. We greatly appreciate all your participation, and we hope to see you on the next one. I hope everybody has a wonderful day, and thank you so much, Marie.